So, welcome everyone to session number 2 for the workshop on archiving for the pandemic in India. And I think one of the reasons yesterday in the first session we sort of skipped the introductions and we went deep into the exercises is because Rebecca had told us about how she would want to start with introductions. So I think just turning the tables around a little bit and seeing how it feels to talk to people whom you don't know. So we did that yesterday. And today it's going to be a very different format. Rebecca is going to talk to us about her project, which is very interesting, and I think I'm very curious to know about it. And hence the title, Acknowledging the Crisis, because it seemed more about um, the dialogue is more about the intention and the approach, and as we discussed yesterday also about planning such an archive. Why do you want to do it, and then how will you do it, which is what Rebecca will take us deeper into. And from there on, she has certain activities for us in mind, and then towards the end we'll have an open dialogue to keep pushing us through into this journey of wanting to archive the pandemic. So without further delay, I'm going to request Sanjana, who is also a co-facilitator of this initiative, to introduce Dr. Rebecca Adelman, and then we get started. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. So we have with us today Dr. Rebecca A. Adelman. So Dr. Rebecca is the chair and professor of Media and Communications Studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She obtained her Ph.D. from Ohio State University in June 2009, and her research interests focus on visual culture, trauma studies, and cultural studies of war, terrorism, and militarization. She is also the founder of the Coronavirus Lost and Found project that Ishita was talking about earlier. This project is a pandemic archive that collects people's stories, especially around this theme of loss, which, as we have all know and experienced, is quite a significant thing that has emerged during this pandemic. So she's here to share her insights and her experiences building this project. And we are very glad to have us with you, Dr. Adelman.
Thank you so much for that and for that wonderful introduction and this invitation. I really feel so fortunate that I'm able to be here with all of you, even if it's only remote. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening. I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with you. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I'm going to spend the time today, and then as promised, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves. So get ready for that awkward moment that's coming, but you have a few minutes to prepare. Well, like a minute. So after we introduce ourselves, I'm just going to talk for a little bit about kind of the background on the project, why I started. I'm going to talk a bit about kind of how I started, focusing both on the kind of theory of what I was trying to do and a little bit about the practice, because I know you all are kind of at this moment when you're sort of trying to think about how to archive this pandemic. And, so I want to kind of balance both of those aspects of it, just kind of like what's the sort of conceptual thing we're trying to do here, and then how do you actually do it? And I'll talk through some of the decisions that I made. After that, we're going to spend some time in small group discussion, just kind of working through I've selected a handful of stories from the archive, and I'm just going to give you some questions, some stories to discuss, and some just questions to frame that discussion. And then we'll do a kind of large group discussion of some of the things you were thinking about. And then we'll have some time at the end just for open question and answer, kind of less structured discussion. I have to sign off it'll be 10:30 my time, so I think it'll be 8 o'clock your time. But I also will leave you with some ideas of things, just some kind of suggested next steps, if that's how you want to spend the last 30 minutes together, or if just kind of things you want to take home and think about later. So that's where we're going today. And what I'd like to do is just ask people to introduce themselves. There's no elegant way to do this, unfortunately, in this format. So what I typically like to do, if it's comfortable for you, is I will just call on one person, and then I will ask that one person to call on someone else until we get all the way around the room. So that's like extra awkward, but this way it's a little bit more, it's slightly more democratic. So I'm just going to go to the top left of my screen, and that happens to be someone named Aparna. Yes, hello. You're surprised. So if you could just tell us who you are and why you're here. And part of the reason I'm asking people to say like why you're here is that I'm hoping then maybe I can just kind of tailor my comments to some of your interests or your questions, or I'll try to sort of do that on the fly. So I'm going to mute myself now. And then after you're done, Aparna, you just call on someone else.
Yes, it feels very powerful to call on someone else. I am Aparna. I am a theatre scholar mostly, and I was also an editor at the Indian Cultural Forum until very recently. It's a platform that looks at diversity and cultural resistance in contemporary times. I also do some visual art and meddle a bit with music as a form of protest. So amongst all these things, the reason why I'm here for the archive especially is because with different times, our focus in different parts of our work shifts. At the moment, my focus is really on my visual art, and I've been more conscious of it because I'm self-taught and I started late in life. I've been more conscious of it in the way that one is when you start learning to ride a bike as an adult, for example. And so I'm really aware of the things that go into it, things that don't go into it, things that that are around me and how that they make their way into it, things that aren't around me and therefore make their way into it. And I've been thinking, because this practice kind of started during the pandemic, in a way, for me, it's an expression of the pandemic. And I'm wondering how I might be able to think of it as an archive, or things surrounding it as an archive of something. Yeah. Oh, here it comes. Shravan Shetty. I see someone. Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Shravan Shetty. I'm a career coach and an NGO consultant working out of Bangalore. Uh, I'm here in this workshop because I think the past year and a half has been very turbulent for me, and especially the past few months because I've lost friends in the pandemic, and there's a sense of personal loss as well as the work that I'm doing with NGOs. I can see a lot which is happening in terms of the NGOs and the challenges that they're facing, where a lot of stuff is, they see the crisis, the people whom they work with are feeling the crisis, but a lot of stuff is pushed aside, unacknowledged, invisibilized. And I'm also coming out of a workshop which I attended, which was on Gestalt, and that's opened up a lot of stuff for me, both from a personal uh, view of myself and the outside world. And I'm attending this program because I feel it's important for me personally and professionally in terms of the kind of work that I'm doing with the social sector to acknowledge the crisis. And I'm not somebody with archiving background, and but I am deeply interested because I don't know what the Lost and Found project of Rebecca is, but there is a certain energy that I feel which kind of resonates in terms of what I am feeling, because I've also found pieces of myself in this current ongoing crisis which I never knew existed. And I've also lost parts of myself and the people whom I was connected to. So that's me. I would. Okay. Wallaby.
Hi, I'm trained as a public space designer and interior designer, and since last year I've been like working with Ishita and team curating for culture and conducting these workshops and helping out with the visuals mainly. And I've also been archiving my grandmother's uh, history, life stories, and everything since last year. And recently she left us, and it's been a great loss. But then, yeah, like this thing was planned, like this part of archiving the COVID pandemic was planned before she left us, and I think that is what has kept me, like ongoing. Rukmini?
Hi. Um, wow. Only when you're put in the spot do you realize how tough it is. Um, so I'm Rukmini. I finished a master's in arts and aesthetics, and recently I started working in a textile research organization in Bangalore. And apart from that, I've been working with sound a lot lately, and that's something that I'm just exploring and looking at it as a medium of archiving. So I felt that this workshop would be an interesting space to explore that, and not just sound, it could be anything else. Um, yeah, but more and more, I think this past year in the pandemic has made me realize how we need to be more in touch with our senses, especially when we lose our sense of smell and taste. It's yeah, something it's made me more sensitive to our senses around. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Right? Yeah. Okay. Palak.
Thanks, Rukmini. Hi, everyone. I basically work with a creative agency and lead like content and creative strategy for a lot of brands. And I am not I have not done archiving or are not not really related to this field directly, but have a background of filmmaking, and that's where my interest of curating a kind of an experience or something, like the desire to of storytelling or narration comes from. And here I am here to learn more about how to make sense of the massive bombardment of content that has come in terms of pandemic. And that's what I think where my desire to explore this subject lies. And I'm really hoping, Rebecca, that you'll inspire us all and take us through this journey. So yeah. Okay, sorry. So I forgot to give away the mic to Mehvesh.
Hi, I'm Mevish. I'm from Pakistan, Lahore. I'm an architect and an academic. And why am I here? I'm here because I've just recently done this really amazing 4-month workshop with Ishita. And in that, I was exploring my project, which was decolonizing home through objects. Um, and right before that, I had actually collecting dilapidated furniture, which belonged to my family and some family friends. And is um that furniture is around about as old as Pakistan, and it migrated from India, Delhi, during partition. So I started collecting those stories and started understanding the process of material archiving, and started to understand how space was basically um, uh, how space sort of changed, or how people made their spaces right after partition while they settled down into their new homes. So that was one. That is the smaller bit of the project that I sort of looked into while doing during the course of last year, and it is sort of a smaller segment of a proposed PhD. The reason why I am here is this, that I want to sort of get going with any information that sort of comes around with archiving. And secondly, another very important reason for me for being here was this, that initially when the whole pandemic started, I also sort of had written down a call and actually started giving out to different people. But to my surprise, I didn't get much response. There were only a couple of friends who wanted to get back to me regarding that, and this was something I was really. I thought that this is something worth documenting because we're going through it every day. And just recently, my whole family had COVID. It was a one hell of a time for all of us the last 2 months. So I just felt that these are very important times, that not just my in my career or what my research is, but as a person, who is going through it as an attendant to a person, to a mother who was really sick. So I felt that I should be here, and that's about it. Other than that, I'll just call upon Navneet Kaur to introduce herself. Thank you.
I'm a photographer, and with like following my instinct and interest, I slowly got into this archiving, the idea of archiving. Mostly, I use documents and photographs to archive the material and oral history. And why I'm here, because I have developed this interest in recording history from quite some time, and I'm very fascinated how people have different forms of recording history, and it varies. It varies, and the kind of state we are living currently, it's very. It's not only about pandemic. There are many things happening: protest, conflict, lots of issues related to ecology. And when I look at like what I was hearing in terms of stories or reading archives, it was totally different. And the current time, it seems very unreal. At the same time, there's so many things running through mind, that what are we going to record, and what all actually, and what are we going to pass it to the generation further, or so there are so many questions right now. I don't know. And recently, in the last 1 month, I've only seen deaths in hospitals, and that phase is still going on. So I'm in very confused state of mind. I'm trying to maybe, indulge myself into things which I like or which I always loved. So that's how I'm here. Like, maybe I'll find my own way to deal with what is happening around. Yes, that's it. And I'll call upon, I can't see all members here on my screen. I'll call upon Avantika.
Thanks, Navneet. Hi, everybody. I'm Avantika. I'm a journalist researcher with a particular interest in oral history, and the broader interest is documenting memory, grief, trauma, and violence. And I've also been involved with Ishita in the last 4 months, where I documented, I'm still in the process of it, but documented my own family history and generational trauma that comes with it. Um, I'm here because I'm working on a COVID oral history project of my own. I've interviewed a couple of people last year, and I aim to re-interview them again this year, and perhaps have started archiving the project through audio entries in the last 2 years. So I have diary notes from every day, and I've put them in form of a podcast. It's called One Year in a Pandemic, where I'm recording everyday feelings, thoughts that I have. And the broader idea of my archive is also to focus on how everybody felt, the missing of home, basically this feeling of homelessness that was so apparent for everyone. And I'm here because I just want to learn what Rebecca's project is all about, and how we all can sort of go forth with everything. So yeah, thanks. Mitul, would you like to go next?
Hi everyone, my name is Mithul. I'm a photo artist and a curator. I work with an art gallery and a print studio, a part of Navjeevan Trust, which is an institute started by a press started by Mahatma Gandhi. Um I was associated with the 4-month program that Avantika and Navish mentioned, which was Ishita's program as a facilitator. I work with archives primarily in two ways. One is a way which is a personal art work where I've been looking at my own photo archives of the decade and trying to make sense of how the journey has been, uh, have a work out of it. And the other is I work with institutional archives, one of which is the Navjeevan Trust Archives. And I'm here because, well, last month was a blur. Couple of deaths in the family, and there's just so much that needed to be said. I had been instinctively documenting, but this seemed like a good trigger to articulate what had been happening in the last month and put it out in some way comprehensible to others. Thank you. And I will call upon Saloni. Is that okay?
Yeah. So hello, I'm Saloni. I graduated from CEPT University as an interior designer 2 weeks back. So currently, like I'm at a crossroads. I'm exploring what all I can do like ahead. So during the pandemic, I turned to art and doodling and sketching as a relief, as like a stress buster. And like I let my intuition guide me. And whenever I've gone back to the journals, I've seen some sort of connects forming. So like I wanted to learn about archiving and curating just to make sense of my own work and like as a form of self-reflection almost. Um, yeah, and also here for the discussions because like I feel I missed that after college has ended. Um, I I'd like I think Namita can go next.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, my video won't turn on. But hi, I'm Namita. I work as a museum researcher currently. For this project, I'm here because personally, I really like this process of documentation and the connect of one incident with the other. So, which is why, as a process of my work, I have been writing down these stories and whatever has happened with me through the past 1 year in the form of different blogs, which I'll be putting together and then eventually reconnecting them with a larger aspect of my life, which was before the pandemic. So, I'm here to basically discuss if and really help myself with the fact that if I'm going in the right direction. Because I have done archiving before, but it has been more at an institutional level. But now that I'm really wanting to take it forward as a career, this platform will help me get a direction to it. Thanks. So next, maybe Palak. I don't know if she's spoken.
Yeah, I spoke, Namita. I think you can nominate
Sorry, joined
somebody
in
else.
late. Uh, who else? I don't know.
If someone just wants to, it's hard to keep track, I know. If someone just wants to jump in and unmute themselves, be brave. Has anyone not introduced themselves yet?
Yeah, quite a few people. So maybe we could start with Ansi. Ansi Thomas.
Yeah, hi. Hi, I'm Ansi. I'm a researcher based in Delhi. My area of interests are photography and visual culture. My interest in archiving is basically I've learned about it in my coursework. My background is in sociology, but I never got a chance to delve more into it. So I thought I would learn more about it in this workshop. and connect it to the things that are happening. Because largely the idea I used to have was archives are something which are state archives, and yeah, in these buildings which are housed. And but then I had heard of this idea of the family archives. So what are the different avenues or ways in which archives are built, and what are the considerations one can have while building an archive? So yeah, those were the interests that I had while I was thinking about learning about archiving. Yeah, I don't know who else is there next.
I've just put a list of names. We could just follow that. I think next is Alina and Devankita. I think Riddhima I've still missed out. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Alina. I'm a image maker and a journalist. I also do some research in human rights across India. So I'm my work looks at family history. I'm interested in the psychological lives of those who I'm photographing mostly, and on personal narratives, and of course, as I said, family history. I'm here because I'm working on a personal project. I've been working on this project for over a year now. Um, it looks at archival material, including photographs and ephemeral material that belong to my adopted grandmother, um, who traveled to India in the early 40s from Normandy, the northern French town. Um, and this is like a pre-World War II context, and so I'm looking at what that journey would mean, and in the times when we're being told constantly that our borders are rigid, it felt important to talk about the fact that they were not always that way. Um, and the fact that my grandmother happened to come in as a Christian missionary. She's a doctor who worked in Salem for over 50 years with patients with leprosy. And so I have all of this information, and of course the oral narration of it through my father, who was her second adopted son. She adopted 7 kids. So and being the photographer and the archivist in the family, I've been conveniently dumped with all of this material, and now I'm just looking through and trying to make sense of it to myself. And yeah, it's to put it in one sentence, it's probably about the idea of found family, and the fact that that can be beyond borders, and it can be anywhere and everywhere. And yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for not switching on the video because it's raining heavily here. I'm Devankita, and I'm a researcher with University of Hyderabad. I work on the cultural history, and my recent work is focused on Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, basically the coastal area of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. And I'm here primarily because of two reasons. The first one is I have never engaged with archives professionally. So I really want to go through the process and methodology of engaging with the archive. And since I work with texts and inscriptions, but I really want to know how the archive works, and how can we like take it personally and professionally. Also because my family comes from a party affected family, and my last grandparent was alive until last year, and she passed away. So having gone through personal loss,
due to some other reason, and also because of COVID. And since I'm also in a post-COVID recovery period right now, so I felt this would be the best time to grab this opportunity and to learn this for, like, I can contribute something to myself also and to the community also, as well as if I learn this now, I can, like, do something on my family history and partition history. So yeah, thank you.
Lavanya, yeah.
Okay, hi. So, yeah, I'm Lavanya. I'm a filmmaker, and I don't have any training with archives, but in my work, I deal with a lot of archival material when I'm building narratives. So when you're really, I resonate with Palak here that when you're really building narratives, there's a lot of material you have to deal with, and you're really trying to evoke a sense of time and memory. And there is this interplay between the subjective and the objective, the interplay between the maker and the material. And I find right now that my sense of time and memory is looping, and these kind of boundaries between subjectivity and objectivity are sort of becoming, I wouldn't say even blurred, but becoming very fluid. And there's this new space extending in between. So yeah, so when you're living through a very shared global phenomenon, in a way it's great because we all have now something really common that sort of brings us all together. We have something common to talk about, but it's a very strange time you're living in. So it does strange things to your mind, and then what does the mind create? So yeah, I got interested in this workshop because as a filmmaker, you're in a hurry to make meaning, in hurry to construct a narrative. And it feels like a time where you need to slow down and just witness things unfolding. And I think a certain understanding in how one works with archives could perhaps help me do that. Yeah, so yeah, that's about it. Okay. So I don't know who to nominate, or was I the last? I don't know.
I think there's me and Ridhima left.
Okay,
Yeah.
So Sanjana, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Sanjana. I'm from Bangalore. I'm a student of political science and anthropology. No, I'm not an archive. My background is not in archiving or history, but I was doing a dissertation on questions of memory and violence in Sri Lanka about 2 years ago, and that really was the entryway into archiving for me. I'm currently working at the NCBS archives here in Bangalore. Well, just like a lot of us, this past year, has been a roller coaster, and like Lavanya just mentioned, I really don't know how to make sense of time anymore. And coming from a family of doctors, questions of death, loss, suffering was something that just kind of took over almost all aspects of my life, both through personal losses, but also because my parents were experiencing a very different kind of something that they had also never seen in their entire career as doctors. So I think these questions kind of took over my mind, and I didn't. The way I had always made sense of things was through poetry and writing, but when poetry and writing began to fail me, I found I actually found the Ishita's platform, Curating for Culture, through the Milli Collective, and I decided to join in and work with her to bring this project into reality. So here I am, and yeah, that's about it.
Looks like I think just Ridhima.
Yeah.
I think Ridhima is introducing herself through the chat. I think, yeah, she.
Yeah, I completely forgot. She's not feeling well. She's under post-COVID recovery as well. So I'm going to read it out. I'm an architect who loves to read about heritage, memory, and community. Been working on an independent research project for SVA in New York. I wanted to be here to develop an understanding on how to deal with archival material, which I have, but more because this initiative allows me to partake a sense of responsibility for posterity, also just to take my mind off the chaos.
Thank you all so much for doing that. I appreciate you. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I appreciate you all taking the time and being willing to kind of to risk that kind of exposure. I know you've had a conversation together yesterday, but it might still be new. So thank you for doing that. I'll talk a little bit about kind of why I did that. And in fact, as I was writing, I don't know if you can see, I was just like writing down what you were saying. So much of what you were saying was resonating with where I was when I first started this project. And so I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons, partially selfish, just because I like to know who's in the room. But also, I think that it's one of the things I've learned through doing this project is that connection to others is actually really, really critical. And one of the things that made it possible for me to create the archive is just like these kind of unexpected connections with other people who had a similar interest or who had a skill they could lend me. Because I also, many of you said, I've never done anything like this before. And here's I'll spoil the ending of my story. I had never done anything even remotely like this before. I don't know what I was thinking, why I thought I could do it. And it seems to have turned out okay, but it was made possible in many ways because there were other people who were just kind of willing to take a risk or willing to either contribute a story or help me sort of think about the architecture. So I think just kind of knowing who you have in your network is really, really crucial. I think one of the other things that's really important, this has come out in some of your comments, that this kind of archival project, because it's a shared kind of global experience, is always going to start personal. Even if your voice isn't in the archive, your hand is going to be in the archive, or your experience is going to be in the archive because you're constructing it, you're setting the parameters. And I think it's really important to be kind of aware of what you're bringing, and also just to kind of think critically about, I guess we might think of it as the affordances and limitations of your own positions, right? So like, what does your unique position allow you to see, right? And what are some of the maybe blind spots that are built in to your position? And so just kind of thinking about how that's going to find its way into the architecture, the structure of your archive. And the last reason I asked everyone to do this is really that it's going to be, if you're trying to build an archive, it's going to be really important for you to know kind of how to talk about it. And one of the things that I hadn't expected when I started this project is that other people would be interested in it. And, and so that means that, like, I've had journalists who have wanted to talk to me about it. And I'm a professor, like, that is not what I do, like most of the time, if I'm talking about my work, it's to a room of like 6 people who also specialize in this work, and they want to ask these really sort of like nerdy in the weeds questions. And that's not like a great approach for, like, if you're talking to a broader audience, like that's just not what other people want to hear. So just being able to talk about your work, talk about it on the fly, talk about it to a broad audience of people with different investments, I think is a really, really important skill. Because one of the biggest challenges for me, and I know someone else mentioned, I have to look at my notes, that they had kind of started asking people to kind of contribute. I think it was Mewish who said, I put out this initial call and I thought I'd get more back, and I didn't. That was the story of my life at first. So take heart. But just being able to kind of talk about what you're doing, talk about why you're doing it. And you all just had such beautiful narrations of the skills you bring to this work, of what you want to accomplish, kind of both personally and like intellectually or artistically. So I think you're really on the right track there. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about kind of my process, kind of building this archive. And then we're going to spend some time sort of working through it. So I created the archive in March and April of 2020, which in the US was just when things were sort of it was simultaneously when things were just kind of beginning to shut down. But it was also sort of in this moment where I think people had yet to kind of recognize that this was going to be kind of the way things were for a long time, right? I think at the outset, even like when we were sort of shutting down the university where I work, it was like, oh, well, we'll be back in a couple of weeks, right? Like it just seemed like this very sort of short term, this like crisis that was likely to be kind of short term and temporarily bounded. And I think no one sort of knew, people knew, but no one listened to them. I think that everyday people didn't really have a sense yet of what was coming. And so my sort of main experience last spring was I felt like the only thing I was doing was canceling stuff. Like I just had this, as everything was sort of shutting down, I just had this, like that kind of became my labor, was like unmaking plans, canceling plans, undoing things. And I had really been, it sounds so silly, right? But like there was just so much that I had been looking forward to, right? So much that I had worked so hard to kind of set up for myself. And like people who know me know that like I'm a planner, right? Like there had been a lot of work that had like gone in to just like planning out the next couple of months. And there was professional opportunities and stuff with my family and trips I wanted to take. I mean, it was just like volunteer opportunities, all this stuff, like the stuff that just like makes a life, right? The stuff that just makes a life, that gives your life, the story of your life, its texture. And I was just like canceling and canceling and canceling. And the thing that was harder, so like besides the fact that just the work of canceling is really awful, right? Like you're on the phone with customer service trying to explain to the airline, why this thing can't happen. But the thing that that really struck me was not just that like I wouldn't have these experiences, but that it would be as if none of this stuff was ever going to happen, right? Like all the work that people had expended and kind of anticipating a life for themselves or like planning all these things was just going to be gone, right? There would be sort of no record of it. And so I started thinking about, I knew as I talked to more people, I knew, right, that wasn't just me, right? That people were in many ways, before they were grieving losses like grieving deaths or things like that, they were started off by kind of grieving futures, right? Futures that they weren't going to have. And in most cases, it was kind of like a shorter term future, but it was just this loss, right? And I got the sense that as I was talking to people, they just didn't really know like where to put it or like where to file it or how to name it. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting, right, if there was some kind of place where people could just kind of track the things that they'd lost, right? So that they had some kind of presence, even though that presence is just like, electrons on a web page, that they would just have there would be some kind of record of this thing that you had that was important to you that is gone now, right? And so I started thinking about maybe just archiving, figuring out some way to archive those. And so I started talking to, he was my boyfriend then, he's my husband now. And I was talking to him about it. I was like, I really want to do this project. And he said, well, of course there are losses, right? But he said, there's good things that have come out of this situation too. And like, how will you capture that? And so I kind of came up with this idea of a lost and found framing, right? And so, because one of the things I wanted to do besides giving these stories a place to live, was also help give people a frame for kind of making sense of them. So to the extent that we're talking about a traumatic experience, one of the sort of hallmarks of traumatic experience is that it's very hard to make sense of it, right? Like trauma kind of destroys our systems of sense making, right? Or it kind of makes us question our systems of sense making. And some of you have spoken to this in your comments, just kind of not being able to get your bearings in time, right? Or feeling like you're living on a loop or on repeat, or you're, you know, a feeling of kind of dislocation or homelessness. And so I wanted to provide a kind of conceptual frame that would maybe help people kind of make sense of their experiences. So I had this kind of vague idea of what I wanted to do. And at that point, I kind of confronted the limits of my own expertise, which was none, right? I had zero expertise in this. I had never, I had done some work like as very little like research in archives. So I knew like what an archive was. I had never built one. I had never really considered myself like a person who did what we would call in the US kind of like public humanities scholarship, which is really sort of like outward facing scholarship. I had never done that. You know, so I really just kind of took a chance. Like, I'm just going to try to do this and do this well. I don't have a lot of skills. And I think in some ways I felt empowered to do it because it felt like, because there was just this moment of like upheaval and uncertainty, like somehow that moment of like everything being disrupted made me feel like I could do something I had never done before, right? Because this sort of unprecedented thing was happening. And I definitely had, you know, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think I could do it responsibly. So I was sort of drawing on like methodological training. Like I had, you know, background in sort of feminist methodologies for like working with other people's stories. And I have a background in sort of thinking about trauma. So I like knew how to kind of bring those skills to bear. I wanted to be really careful and cautious and respectful with what I was doing. So I feel like I had those skills, but just the kind of like practical, how do you build an archive, did not have it. So in some ways I got lucky. I found, I also did not have any skills building websites. So you can see I had nothing but an idea. And I found a web developer who just, he was a friend of my husband's. They had worked together. And I just said, I want to do this thing. Can you help me? And he said, I think it's a really cool project. He gave me like a huge discount to build the site and maintain it just because he was a good guy. And so we went through a bunch of iterations. My husband's a UX designer. He's got a design background. He's a UX designer. So he had helped me kind of think about some of the architecture and how I knew how I wanted it to look. I just didn't know how to make it look that way myself. So those of you that are artists are like way ahead. So I needed someone else's skills to like make it look this way. And so we just went through a bunch of iterations. And then I launched the website in early April of 2020. In many ways to a kind of nauseating silence, right? Like I had put all this effort into doing this thing and it took me quite a bit of time to kind of give it some, get some momentum behind it. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the design decisions that I made. And then I'll talk a bit about kind of how to sort of get past that initial, I describe it as nauseating. Like it really was to me, because it's like, you know, you throw a party and no one comes. Like it was really I was like, am I totally wrong about this? Like if I completely missed the mark, why isn't this like not catching? So a couple of the design decisions I made that I'm going to talk through, not because I think they're the best way to do things or the only way to do things, but really just because I want to sort of highlight the importance of being really intentional about the construction of your archive. So the first thing that I wanted to do was eliminate any kind of opportunity for sort of like liking or commenting. So one of the things that is kind of crucial to the design of my website is there's no you can't like read a story and like it. You can't comment on it. You can definitely like share it, but on the site itself, there's no kind of social media type. I mean, it's connected to people's social media, but you can't do it on the site itself. And what I really just wanted to do there was create a space where people could speak for themselves and not have to like justify how they were feeling. I didn't want anyone to, tell a story, even if their loss was something that we might think is kind of like trivial, like to them it's really big, right? To them it's really, really big. And I just wanted to kind of give a space for that to matter, right? And so I didn't want anyone to respond with like, oh, it could be worse. This is the thing we say all the time in the US. It's like, oh, it could be worse, or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or everything happens for a reason. I don't know if those things are true, but they don't help, right? Like I do know that they don't help, right? And I didn't want that. So there's no, I eliminated any kind of like conversational option on the archive. And there's definitely a loss that comes with, there's definitely a cost that comes with that, because it does start to feel, it can feel very like one way there, right? But I was willing to sort of take that risk because I thought the other option might have just been too costly or detrimental. The other thing that I decided to do, and this felt a little risky, was that I decided I wasn't going to edit things before I posted them. I read everything before it goes up just to make sure that there's nothing, because I want it to be a safe space, just to make sure that there's nothing like nothing offensive. But other than that, like I don't correct the spelling. I don't make any other kinds of changes. Like it just kind of goes up as it's written. And I've definitely had, at least in one instance, someone come back and say, she said, like, I was really angry when I wrote that. Can you please like make these changes? And of course I will do that, right? I always want people to have like authority over their stories, but I didn't execute it or implement any kind of like editing of my own. And I think so far there's really only been one post that I haven't run because I felt like they were spreading like misinformation about COVID. And I was like, well, I'm gonna exercise some like editorial license there. But otherwise I just kind of let people tell their stories. The other thing about the design decision that I made is that the only sort of thing that's required to post to the site besides like a title and a description of what you've lost is that you have to decide whether it's a lost or a found. And this is partially just because I wanted it to be searchable. It's also because I really just was enamored of my lost found idea. But one of the things so you have to choose, right? You can't be both. And one of the things that's been really interesting to me and unexpected, in part because I'm such a rule follower, is the ways that people have kind of pushed the boundaries of the lost and found, right? Or sort of read, like talking about like some people have like lost things they were happy to lose, right? Or maybe found things that weren't necessarily like good. So it's been, or talked about kind of losing and finding together. And so it's been really interesting to me to see how even within those constraints, people have been creative, sort of beyond the original framing that I had envisioned for the website. And the other thing that I really wanted to resist, I talked about this a little bit before in terms of my decision to, not allow like liking or commenting, is I really wanted to resist this kind of like silver linings narrative, right? Which is this kind of notion that in every sort of bad situation, there's this good. And I'm just not sure that's true, right? Like, I don't know that we'd have to look really hard to find the silver lining in like the death of a beloved grandparent, for example. And so what I wanted to do was really not ever give a sense that like somehow the good was canceling out the bad. I just kind of wanted to allow like the lost and the found to sort of accumulate alongside each other, right? Like I didn't want to give a sense that there was some kind of like canceling out or offsetting or balancing books. I just wanted to kind of let them accumulate as they accumulate in real life. So those were some of the decisions that I made. Again, not because I think they're the best way to do this or the only way to do this. I was just trying to think about how to kind of bring the things that I was thinking about that I believe, right, and kind of give them this material form that would then be open to everyone else. So in terms of, as I said, you know, the first moment, the first couple weeks, I was just, it was really a nerve-wracking couple of weeks because I was just not, like, things were sort of trickling in, and I was just not sure how to, like, just not sure how to make this happen, right? I had built the archive, but I wasn't sure how to fill it. And I remember the first time I got a post from someone I didn't know. I remember exactly where I was. I had checked the email on my phone, and I was like, I was like, oh my God, it's working. It's working. Like, someone found it. Someone wrote this amazing thing. Because before that, I had just been like begging my friends and family, like, can you just put something here? You know, it's kind of like when in a restaurant, there's a tip jar, and somebody, like, the server puts the first $1 in the tip jar, so someone else will put $1 in someone else will put money in the tip jar. That's kind of what I was doing. And the process for me of, like, getting submissions was really very, it was very mechanical, and it was very hands-on, and especially initially. And part of it, one of the challenges for me is that I don't use any kind of social media. I'll spare you my whole big long story about why I don't use any social media. So I really had to kind of do this the old-fashioned way. If you do use social media, you're, like, way ahead of me. So I really just I started just contacting people, and I begged my family, I begged my friends, but I also just kind of went through my broad list of contacts, and I would just write to them and say, like, hey, I started this thing. Would you be interested? I mean, it was more artistic or more elegant than this. I was like, would you be interested in contributing, or could you at least help me spread the word? Like, could you at least forward this on? And people did, right? And I think my friends know that I'm, like, the weirdo with no social media, so they, like, take pity on me and tweet stuff for me sometimes. But, you know, I mean, it was really very, like, it was a very labor intensive process. And I think that the best thing I can say, or the best advice I can give from that labor intensive process, is just to kind of know going in that it may, especially if you're asking other people to contribute to your archive, that it will be very labor intensive. Don't give up. You may at some point feel like you need to kind of retool your approach a little bit, or say, like, if this isn't working, like, what's the problem? But don't give up, and just understand that it's going to take time. And the other thing that people were telling me is, like, you know, they'd say, like, oh, I'm definitely going to do this, but I just need to think about it. And one of the things that didn't occur to me is that people would be sort of either that they would be hesitant about sharing their stories, or that they would, I mean, some people clearly were not hesitant at all. Like, it was, you know, I'd get some entries and it was clear somebody had just, like, dashed this off in a few minutes, and they were like, here you go. But others of the stories were really just, like, writerly and thoughtful. And I think it didn't occur to me, because, like, I had this idea and I'd been sitting with this idea for, like, a month. It didn't occur to me that people would just need some time to kind of figure out what they wanted to say, or really kind of craft it. So just being willing to be patient, I think, is really, really important. Being patient and trusting the process. And also just sort of making sure that you don't measure the success of your archive quantitatively. And I think that was a trap I sort of fell into at first. I was like, I only have 5, it's a failure. And, like, if I have 5 amazing stories and they get seen by 100 people, like, that to me would still be a win, right? Like, you have to kind of think beyond the kind of quantitative and those sort of metrics that we tend to all think in when we're thinking about the success of a thing. One of the other things that I did early on that I think actually did make a difference, and it would be something I would recommend if it's comfortable for you, is if you have anyone in your network, or those of you that are affiliated with universities or other institutions, you probably have someone that does there's somebody there who does communications, which means they connect to local, like, journalists and that sort of thing. That was actually I think that was a smart decision I made at first, is just kind of, like, knowing the people at my university who like connect with the like local journalists, just say like, here, I'm working on this. If you happen to have an opportunity to tell someone about it, I think that that can be really helpful, because it's just going to broaden your reach tremendously. And so I'm still getting media requests now, even like a year later, to talk about this project. And some of them were like less surprising to me because they were local, but there was a journalist in Brazil who found out about the project, which explains why there are a handful of entries in the archive that are in Portuguese. I speak not a word of Portuguese, so I did like a Google Translate just to kind of see what they were talking about. But just using, like, being willing to make those kinds of connections, if it's comfortable for you, can make a big difference for your project. So in terms of where things stand now, we're about like 15 months into this thing. I have just short of 200 entries from people, sort of all over the area where I live, all over the US, and indeed like all over the world. That's been really like heartening and surprising to me to see that there are people on actually every continent except Antarctica who have seen fit to share their stories. The other thing I would say is just that, like, the other thing that I didn't anticipate coming in, and it seems like many of you are already thinking along these lines, was the kind of feeling of responsibility that I would have to these stories. And I think I didn't, and the people who wrote them. So I deliberately didn't design this site as like research. So there's no, like in the US, we'd have to go through an institutional review board for human subjects research. And I was like, I didn't have the time for that. And I also didn't want to treat this as research. So in some ways I have this archive that like, I can't publish from it, but I didn't want to, like I didn't want to kind of commodify or like objectify the stories in that way. Like I really just wanted this to be like a service, like a small service that I provided, knowing that everyone is like grieving, everyone is reeling. And so I didn't do it that way. Like I'm not sort of thinking about it as research. So that was a decision that I made. That's a thing that those of you who are researchers, you can sort of decide how you want to position the archive with respect to your own research. But one thing that I didn't expect was the feeling of responsibility that I would have like over these stories. And in some ways it's been really cool. Like there's someone who wrote an entry from like way back in the beginning. She's in Germany and like we're friends now. We send each other cards, and like we have this email correspondence. And in other cases it has become very sort of laborious. Like I wanted to ask one of the writers permission to excerpt her story in an article that I wrote for this blog. And we spent like 2 hours on the phone, right? Just so she could I wanted her to be comfortable with what I was going to say. And she wanted to be comfortable, she wanted to know what I was going to say. So just being kind of aware at the beginning. And again, it seems like many of you already know this, that if you're collecting other people's stories, you're going to have this, like, it doesn't, in some cases it will end with that, right? Like they just give you the story and you put it in your archive and then you go. In other cases, like that is the beginning of a relationship, right? And you think about how you're going to handle that relationship. So that's just the sort of overview. That's the overview. And I wanted to focus again about some of the decisions that I made and some of my reasons for making those decisions. And what I'd like to do now is just kind of give you some time to talk through some of the stories, talk to one another, and then we'll do sort of a large group regroup. This may mean, since we're getting close on time, is that we may not have time to do Q&A like here together, because I want to give you guys time to talk to each other and then talk back about the stories. But I'll just share my email address if you have other questions or anything ways that you want to continue the conversation. So I think we have about 20 people here. Ishita, can you start putting people into breakout groups. I don't know, we'll do 5 groups, is that?
Yes.
Okay.
So 5 groups with 4 people. It's right now putting you also in a group. So should I just take you out? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, if you want to just take me out, and then what I will do is, I think once people are in breakout groups, they'll still be able to see the chat. So I'm going to post some URLs and questions in the chat. So what I'm going to ask each group to do is just read the story together. And then I'm going to post a couple questions for you to talk about, like kind of talk through to structure the discussion. And then we'll do that for maybe about 10-ish minutes and have the groups come back and report. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so while the Google robot is putting you all in your groups, I'm going to post some stuff in the chat, and then we'll go from there, okay?
Rebecca, sorry, can I just sort of step out of line and just say this was such a beautiful story I just read. You know, we were just...
Oh, which group were you in? Thank you for that feedback.
Group 5.
Group 5. Oh, yeah, I love that one. I mean, I love all of them, but yes.
It's just so short, simple, everyday, and it's, oh my God, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so evocative, right? You can just, to me, I just could kind of picture the whole scene, and it was written, like the writing, as you said, was very spare. But thank you for sharing that. So it looks like most people are back or finding their way back. What I would like to do now is I'd like to ask, so in your small groups, thank you also for your patience with the technical challenges. This is a new platform for me, so thank you for that. What I'd like to do, in your groups, I asked you to sort of speak a little bit more, maybe personally, asking, you know, what parts of the story resonated with you, or what felt maybe unfamiliar, or then just sort of thinking about the story, like what does this story, right, which is just one person's story, add to our shared understanding of the pandemic. So those were some of the things I asked you to kind of talk and think about individually. What I'd like to ask you to do now maybe would be to one person from each group, not necessarily to summarize the conversation, but at least to kind of give like a short synopsis of what the story was, just so we're all kind of on the same page. And then maybe either if there's the first 3 anything from the first 3 questions you want to pick up on, that's fine. Or if you want to maybe take on another question, thinking about your group's conversation, just to ask maybe, is there anything in the story that you read or the conversation, the small group conversation you had, that might make you, that might inspire you in some way as you're trying to figure out your own archival practice? Is there anything, like reading the story, thinking about it both as a story and thinking about the purpose of this workshop, which is really to kind of refine our own archival, our archival techniques. So that would be another way to approach the reporting out if you wanted. You can either sort of summarize what the group talked about, or if there's something in reading or discussing the story that made you think in a new way about your own archival practice, we'd love to hear that. So anybody from group 1 want to report out, be the spokesperson for the group? I'll mute myself. I don't actually know who was in the groups, so I'll just have to trust you if there's anybody from group 1.
So we were in group. So group 1 was the Bankita, Rukmini, and myself. So the Bankita, Rukmini, do either of you want to speak?
You can go ahead, Sanjana, no problem.
Okay, so I guess it's on me now. Okay. So we had a story about written by Becky from England, and she was talking about her experiences of shielding during the pandemic, which I guess involved her and her husband having to stay inside and not go outside even for essentials, including groceries. So the story was kind of exploring this emotion of this loss of independence that they were feeling in having to ask people to do everything for them, and having to get their essentials, and having to ensure that they had the things that they needed during this time. And so it was talking about this loss that they were facing of just independence. But I think the conversation, well, first off, I think our group was just kind of talking about the thing that we kind of really focused on was this idea of being a burden and what that means, and how I think each one of us connected to this feeling of being a burden in a very different way. So our conversation just took that turn, and just really thought we kind of really thought about that. But I guess the more I think about it, the more I think about how maybe these platforms have this role to play in ensuring that people who do feel like their stories are a burden have a place to feel like there is a place for them. And I guess I just started thinking about how can we communicate this idea to people when we're trying to make this place, like make this platform a safe space and make this platform where people can share. So yeah, but aside from that, I think it was just really nice. We were just reflecting on how it was really nice to talk to someone. So the Bankita is in North Bengal, so she's in Siliguri, close to Siliguri. So it's quite a far away place. But I was just thinking about how we'd never get a chance to speak to someone, even someone from our own country, from such a far away place. But here we all are, and even those few minutes of conversation was just heartening, I think. So,
can I just add to this quickly?
Of course, yeah. Sure.
So when we were looking at the article, you might have already talked about it, Sanjana, but so it was placed under lost, and we were discussing whether it should be like, can it be counted as something that is, of course, that person thinks that it can be in the category of lost, but to me it felt like it was more about found. She found her what she was feeling, and through that we found each other. So it's a bit so yeah, we were just discussing the category of lost and found, and how you can play around with it. I guess for somebody who's reading it, it could be found, and maybe every time you read such an article, you're always finding something in it. So I wonder if there are more in the found than in the lost as each person reads this. So yeah.
I think that's a really wonderful point and really well put. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is just the kind of porousness of the boundaries between lost and found. Like I tend to be a very sort of black and white thinker. It's either this or that, and that's when I think exactly right. That's one of the things that I've realized, that those categories are not quite so separate as we might think they are. I wanted to also just pick up on something, Sanjana, that you said is, the narrator of this story, and all the links, I can share all the links again as well, is talking about being chronically ill and very early in the pandemic, just realizing that she and her husband would have to depend on others for everything, right? Even those essentials. And there's this moment in the story where she sort of talks about feeling guilty that she wants things that aren't essential, right? She wants chocolate, right? And she can't stop thinking about wanting chocolate. And now she has to ask someone to get her chocolate. And I was thinking about something you said, Sanjana, about, the feeling of being a burden and the possibility that an archive like this, or like the ones that you all are thinking about creating, could give people a place to kind of share those feelings. And I think that one of the reasons that this story really resonated for me is like, it's clear that this person is feeling guilt and like feeling shame and feeling frustration. And I feel really, sort of humbled by the fact that, she was willing to kind of take the chance on a stranger. I have no idea who she is. We've never met, take the chance on a stranger and like use this archive as a place to sort of to put those feelings. And it was a story like this that made me really glad that I had sort of made the decision not to let people comment, right? Because this seems like the sort of thing where like people would have a lot of hot takes about it. And I was really glad that like it could just be sort of her words, and then like that's kind of the end. That's the end of it. We can talk about it, but like they kind of live as they are. So thank you, Group One. Thank you for that and for going first. Would someone like to speak from group 2, who was which was the story "The Loss of My Other Life"?
Yeah, we decided that Avantika is going to speak on our behalf.
Oh, I thought that was a joke, but now it isn't. The story is My Other Life, and it was written by somebody called Jessica Grimm from Ohio. And the first reading told us that this person was volunteering with Peace Corps in Myanmar, and it was almost a year, from Jan 19 to March 20, that they spent their time there, and it was very little bit in which they had to make the move back home. And so it was a sudden loss of a community and a couple of things that this person has mentioned. What struck out for all three of us were different things. For Alina, the fact that this person is going to miss 15 varieties of mango and 25 varieties of banana was something that she kept to herself. For me, I felt that just this last line this person mentioned, that there's a sense of impermanence that this person is going to miss, which sounded very weird, because impermanence is something we always want to get rid of, and yet it was a loss. So each side, flavor, friendship, everything that's temporary, already inclusive of its own loss. Ansi spoke of how she could relate to this person mentioning streets filled with people and the crowd, and maybe she would like to elucidate more on it, but how it is something that's not been felt in the pandemic for so long, that it's something of the past now. uh, Overall, what we felt was that, I mean, we concluded with the fact that the loss in the pandemic has had a very different tonality from other losses, let's say in a disaster, when one is asked to move out of their houses or evacuate their homes at a short notice. Has the pandemic made us look at the past differently? Do we feel things differently than we would have felt in case of any other devastation? So, uh, I don't know, do you guys want to add something else? Please do. But this kind of stuck with me, that what is this tonality? What is this different that the pandemic has added to the flavor of how we look at past and the loss of us?
Yeah, so also just to quickly, and I'm not allowed to do this, but just to quickly add to that, was that also that the format and the design of the website, um, I mean, made a difference, because you don't see the person's name right in front. You can't presume they're from like Oberlin or wherever they're from. You have to read the story, and while I was reading it, it did feel like, when evacuation is mentioned, you're not first thinking that this person has to go back home, and that they don't belong here, because of how this stream of consciousness writing sort of comes in, where they're just describing the marketplace, the busyness, how the dogs have taken over the street at night. These very visceral and very vivid sort of like writing, right? So it almost seems like they're a local, they live there, they reside there, and they've spent some amount of time. So until you come to the end, you see the name, you see that their location is a different place altogether, right? um, and this was also another way. It was completely different from what we're used to when we think of like evacuations previously. It never used to be in relation to a pandemic. This is like a very, it's somewhat of a new concept to like all of us, right? It's We're used to it in natural like disasters, or if there's an earthquake, you have to be evacuated. But this was like, we heard news stories about how people had to be evacuated from countries that were witnessing like Zika and Ebola and all of these, and it seemed so far away from us, and now we're having to deal with that same sort of thing, which was very like alienating in itself. And I think that was the most unfamiliar thing for me in the story, the entire experience, in fact.
Again, those are just really, really beautiful comments, and I thank you for sharing them. I wanted to just pick up. I wish I could have like spied on all the groups. I just decided to keep myself out of them because it sounds like you had wonderful conversations. But I think that one of the things that Avantika, you said kind of at the beginning was about the specific tonality of this kind of loss, and I think that one thing to kind of keep in mind is that you were just saying that made me think like every disaster is going to have its own feeling or sort of complex of feelings, and the archival practices that we might use in one for one type of evacuation, one type of disaster may need to be changed. The same general principles might apply of care for the stories or overall construction of the archive, but to be really mindful about like what are the specific contours of like this disaster, right? And it's going to be different from person to person and place to place, and how do we kind of capture those? The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I forgot to say this when I was talking about the design of the site, I created it so that, it's very text-based, which is interesting because I study visual culture. Like, I don't know, but it's very text-based. And I gave people the option to upload an image if they wanted. And so this person did. She did include an image, upload an image if they wanted, or embed a link to a video or audio recording. I couldn't do embedded video or audio because it would just have taken too much space. Like, it was just more bandwidth than I could afford to pay for. I was surprised that not many people did choose to use this option. Like, I thought people would have just been like clamoring to put pictures with their stories, but I think it's the minority of people that have. But that was something that I just wanted people to be able to do if they so choose, or if they so chose to do it. So group 3, who would like to report from group 3? You all had the story about a young woman returning to Okinawa at the kind of early in the pandemic and falling mysteriously ill.
Mithul, do you want to do it? Because you were kind of cramped for time earlier.
I'm okay. Either ways, if you want to go ahead, you could.
Yeah,
Mithul, I think the same like Aparna. I think you didn't get enough time, please.
Okay. So one thing which was unanimous in the responses between all the 4 of us was there was a sense of unfamiliarity. To respond to the first question of what resonates with you, I think all of us felt a little difficult to find an answer to that, because it seemed like none of us had an experience which the protagonist in the story mentions, because it's also written quite there's a quite nuanced expression of the person's feelings and their experience, although the journey might be something a lot of people might have had. But through the conversations after everyone read, I think we sort of found a chain of thought of how communication within our loved ones has changed in these last couple of years. And that was, at least personally speaking, that was something that I had completely overlooked. And I mentioned I don't remember how we used to communicate or how the conversations used to be with my family or with other people before these 2 years, because the way we, even logistically, or the form of communication is now very different than it used to be a couple of years ago. Guys, please feel free to add anything that I've missed out.
Yeah, I think I will just add that there was a blurring of lost and found. If I am going to summarize a bit, Shravan spoke about his sister moving away, and there's a sense of awkwardness in the way that relationship is. And I spoke about how my estranged family got back in touch. So there was a strange kind of, how do relationships mutate in this time? Also, I think self-healing is what Ridhima mentioned. How do you deal with your own body in relation to that? Yeah, is that... Ridhima, do you want to add anything?
I think the only feelings that I would add is that there is a sense of loss of an earlier relationship the way it was, as well as a sense of nostalgia. But when you think about it in the present, it's more awkward, and you don't know whether you want to move ahead in the relationship or you want to step back. It's kind of like it's the same person is a stranger now, the loved one, whether it could be parents or it could be a sister, or the relationships. It's unfamiliar. In fact, it's like the question, it's like the question which was put to us. There is a sense of unfamiliarity with the familiar, if I could say so as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all. Those are really, really remarkable comments. And I think that, yeah, there's something, one of the things I really appreciate in what you were saying is just this sort of ingenuity that you all displayed in connecting to a story that you immediately said was unfamiliar to us, right? Like it's unfamiliar, but then you said that, and then it kind of opened onto this conversation about, our own estranged families or our own experiences of embodiment or changes in the way that we have all communicated. And I think just like what you've modeled there is a kind of empathy and a kind of creativity and a sort of an experiment of thought or feeling that, like, at their best, I think that's what these kinds of projects can do, to kind of make those sorts of connections once you get past the initial, like, I don't think I understand, I don't think I can relate with this. Thank you so much. Group 4, it seems like Palak has already been nominated to speak. I don't know. I don't know if you support that nomination.
I think it's a complex subject, and the timing was really less for all of us to say our stories. And if anybody else wants to, Nevish, Saloni, Navneet, if you guys want to add start in first, you can, because I think
you should definitely go ahead, because we couldn't really get to you and there was a time crunch. So please go ahead.
so. It was the article that the story that we got was about the refugee complex and refugee reflex, and how and the comparison to a wartime situation where the last line, which was what resonated with all of us, was they knew without knowing how they knew what to do next. And that was something which was like a starting point for our conversation. So one was this, and the other part was about the story wherein this long commute that the refugees took, and whatever the system of transportation was shut. So those were the 2 points where our conversation started with, and then we went into the personal narratives. And even though it's the stories are so personal, and it's a shared reality and it's a shared experience, but the experience is so different for each one of us. And again, the refugee reflex is familiar and unfamiliar, because we all were hoarding all the groceries and toilet papers, and there was this whole thing that pandemic brought in. And at the same time, we were so isolated in this experience and trying to survive, how that instinct that a refugee would go in for. So others, please add in to the conversation, please. Saloni, Mevish, Navneet.
Yeah, that's about it. I think that you've covered most of our discussion. That we've spoken about the commute that had a sort of. Saloni mentioned that how she sort of felt familiar with that, and then Navneet also mentioned one thing, that she did not feel that much familiarity with the writing, because there are no. For example, she mentioned that although we're going through this pandemic, but we don't have that much of a harsh reality. And I think she can speak for herself better than what I'm trying to explain. But for some reason, she's quiet, so I'll just pin it. So yeah, that's about it. And I just sort of also explained that the last line, which says that they just knew what to do. So in my own personal experience, where my family was affected, I shared it with the other team members that I sort of felt a lot of familiarity with that sentence. That I felt that I was on an autopilot, and the whole family was on an autopilot. There were not much thoughts. We were not feeling much about not even feeling much pain or sorrow, but we were just going through the day, and that was about it. Eating, taking care of each other, having some empathy, also having breakdowns, especially siblings. Too many breakdowns, I rather say. So that's about it. Yes.
When I said about, like, I spoke about unfamiliarity, I think that's very personal because I still find myself lost in the math, or in the numbers every day, the kind of statistics we are getting. So I myself was looking at different kind of stories from the past, and multiple times I try to compare that what stories we have for the generation, for the posterity, you can say, but at the same time, like, very confused state of mind. It seems unreal, it seems quiet, it seems um, very it seems contrastive. It seems the only similarity I could find, that that movement was stopped. We are living at one place. The rest, I'm still lost. Like, I'm still living in a world where I find loss of words. There's so many thoughts in the mind, but I'm struggling with my, you know, words to express it. Or I like many things. One similarity can be like, we are we are living a mechanical life. We do everything. Like, for our daily needs, we are doing everything. Yes, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all for sharing your reflections, and again, your sort of the ways that you were connecting to the story. One thing that I did want to say, this kind of comes out in a couple of your comments, is just that feeling of like being lost in, I think Navneet, you said lost in the numbers, or being at a loss for words. And I think one of the things that archival work can do is, especially when you're dealing with a disaster on a global scale, right? Where we typically talk about measuring it in like these staggering numbers, right? These staggering numbers, millions of people, however many deaths, trillions of dollars, which we talk about a lot in the US. And that's one way of knowing, right? But there's this other way of knowing that I think is much more intimate and in many ways much more powerful, which is at the kind of human level, right? This sort of human scale. And like none of the stories that are included in this archive will ever, like, they're never going to like be on the news, right? Like they're never going to attain that level of visibility. But you can sort of create an environment in which they matter, right? In which like this story that might seemingly be like unremarkable or specific to one person, like can matter, right? Can resonate, can anchor a larger conversation. The other thing I wanted to say, and then we'll move on to group 5, is just this kind of, what I'm hearing too is this kind of tension between like universal and particular. And I think one of the things that it's important to think about as you're designing your own archive is to understand who you want to be speaking for, right? If you're thinking about this purely as a project, a lot of you talked about family archives, right? Or archiving a grandmother, an adopted grandmother, or a parent's history, or that sort of thing. I think just deciding whether you want to kind of land at universal or particular and being willing to kind of own and defend that choice. Like one of the questions that people have asked me a lot is like, well, what are some of the themes that have come out in the archive? And I've always struggled to answer that question. And I think the answer that I landed at is that I'm not really interested in the themes, right? Which is not the answer that the person who asked that question wants, right? They want some story about like some like overarching story about humanity. And I think I really kind of landed on the side of the particular. Like I like that there's a diverse collection of writers. And I think just the 5 stories that I sampled here show that people are coming at this from a lot of different perspectives. And I like that. And I think I want to hold on to that, right? I think I want to emphasize that each of these stories is unique and deserves to be kind of like read in its own uniqueness, as opposed to kind of moving to that sort of effort to extract a different kind of value from the stories, which is like, how can everyone relate to this? And I don't think it has to be relatable to everyone. I don't think they have to tell everyone's story in order to be worthwhile. So I think that would be one bit of advice that I would give, is kind of decide where you land on the kind of universal particular divide, right? Like, are you wanting to tell certain specific stories more deeply, or are you hoping to get to a, you know, like, are you trying to make a grander claim? There's reasons to do both, but I think kind of clarifying that vision for yourself will be really important as you think about how to design your archive and who you want to kind of be in it and how you want to kind of frame their stories. I've been talking a lot. Group 5, you are our last group, and you had the story, the body that found the body that gave birth to my daughter.
Okay. So the story itself begins with, you know, that it's a dance party that is happening on one of the Corona nights. And then as we proceed further, we see that, you know, it is actually not about a dance party that is happening, but more about trying to achieve a certain number of step count. Yeah. So I think the first thing that I noticed was the transition of the meaning of dance, where so it is a story about a mother who has to achieve these certain number of steps, and she has 3 kids. One of her daughters at a later point actually motivates her to, you know, get finish 10,000 steps, when the mother is saying that it is about just doing 800 steps for today. So I think there's a certain sense of achievement as the story further goes, as the narration goes, that the mother has somebody with her to do this. But somehow, what I also felt was there was a character or the father missing from the story. So I have this certain sense of curiosity about it, that where is this another family member? Yeah. So there are mixed emotions happening at different levels, but there's also the whole thing that I liked was that there was this sense of achievement that the mother has, that, you know, her daughter is there for her, and then there are these 2 kids who are just silently standing there and looking at her. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so so after Namita said this, Wallaby, for Wallaby, what resonated was, you know, every day is really the same, the mundane ritual, but, you know, one day you do something different. You decide to cook a special dish for yourself, or you dance. So that was what resonated, you know, like in this strange continuity of sorts, you had these little moments. What was, and she felt everything was familiar for her. And the meaning that she got, a certain meaning was, you know, this shared, sometimes you feel like giving up in this situation, and she sort of resonated with that. So yeah, in this story, we'll have to sort of agree with all the participants who said before us that there is a, you know, there is a sense of both lost and found, unfamiliar and familiar. Because for me, there was I had resonated with the sense of aging, because I mean, not particularly aging, but some sort of heaviness, grief, trauma, I don't know, that is sort of, you feel it in your body. The unfamiliarity perhaps with the motherhood, but then but there's something that strange that happens when the mother is first a little resentful and angry about her daughter's youthful energy. She can do the 10,000 steps, and well, she can't. And then when her daughter's encouraging her to do the steps, she also takes pride in this healthy body that came out of her. And something interesting happens there. I don't know what, but there's some sort of a shared continuity that you feel across generations, from woman to woman, and perhaps it can be much more than that. So yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense, but so yeah, there is everything slips into each other. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. You're not very familiar with motherhood, but then it sort of becomes familiar, the complexity of it. And a day that began on a note of giving up becomes a pretty interesting moment for this lady and her daughter. So yeah, I think I'll stop with that. Am I happy? Pallavi?
Yes. Yes,
definitely. Yeah.
I think that's just really very well put, that idea of everything slips into one another, right? But and that from that kind of slipping into one another, we're able to find these moments of connection, or these moments of resonance. And I really liked what you said about how you try to find ways to kind of make every day special. You cook a special meal, or you dance, or you do whatever it is that you do to kind of get through. And I also want to kind of think about then, as we're wrapping up, I know we're over time, as we're sort of wrapping up, to think about the possibility of the act of constructing an archive as a way of kind of carving up, doing something special in that day, right? Like to kind of add that, right, that your curation of an experience, whether it's for yourself, for your family, for a broader audience, is also kind of a way of creating that space where people can just take a minute and catch their breath, or read something beautiful, or see something compelling. Like that's what you're doing, right? Like that's kind of, in many ways, you're curating that experience, or you're giving someone else the gift of that experience, whether it's just giving them the opportunity to like tell you their story while you record it and you just like nod understandingly, or you create an online form where they can submit their story, or whatever it is that it's a gift you're giving to your family. There's a real generosity, I think, in the act of archiving that I think is worth acknowledging. Just to wrap up very quickly, I had all this other stuff to say. I'm terrible at time management, but it's only gotten worse during the pandemic. But I will say, I'll put my email address in the chat in a moment. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Just a couple of things, okay, just a couple of things. I'll start with the practical things that I would say would be like good next steps. I know this is just the very beginning of your week and a half or so of conversation, or week of conversation. A couple of things, just sort of practical next steps, and this was what I was going to leave you with when I was going to leave early, was I just couldn't tear myself away. So the thing that I would say, especially if you're interested in inviting other people to contribute to your archive, if you haven't already done this, start kind of drafting. We might be fancy about it and call it like your outreach plan, but it might just be making a list of everyone you can talk to about this. And when you start listing, I think you'll be surprised by how many people's names will appear on that list. But I think it is really helpful to just kind of have a list. And I'm pretty shy, so I really had to like pace myself going through the list. I was like, I'm just going to talk to 3 people about this today, and then I have to like go lay down. But just really kind of being methodical about that. The other thing that I would recommend doing, again, this is more for people if you're trying to get others to contribute to your archive, would be to spend some time like drafting your sort of like your appeal or your call to action, and then maybe workshopping that with your new friends here, so they can kind of help you see, like, is this inviting? They can help you understand, like, are you asking like, are you eliciting the kind of information that you really want? It's important to know how to ask good questions, and sometimes the best way to refine our questions is in conversation. So that would be another thing I would recommend sort of using this network for, is asking someone to kind of help you with your communication to potential contributors to your archive. And then the other option is always you can contribute your own lost and found. If there's anything you want to share, I'm leaving the archive open indefinitely for like as long as I can sustain it. So if there's something that you want to contribute, you can contribute anonymously if you'd like, or not. You can attach your name to it, but that invitation is open. And it remains open. So if that's a thing that you would like to do, that space is available for you. I think the last thing I will say is that one of the things that is really hard to know is like when is an archive over, right? And that's an awkwardly phrased question. I love the deadline. I think it's on the archive that you're running. I think it's you, Ishita, that the deadline is till we all heal. I love that deadline, right? I think that is that's just like the perfect way to think about this, particularly in the US. It feels like we've just decided in the United States that the pandemic is over, right? And like everything is just, I mean, you wouldn't know, like just walking around outside, you wouldn't know, right? That in parts of this country and much of the rest of the world, like the pandemic is not over. And I think one of the kind of tensions that I'm experiencing is like this kind of push here in the US. I'm gesturing behind me, I don't know why. Like this push in the US to say like, now we return to normal. But to me, I think there's a risk there in kind of like erasing all the grief, erasing all the loss, just erasing everything that people have had to do to survive and kind of normalizing it as well. So I'm really sort of trying to like resist that impulse and really sort of do the work of acknowledging like, what did it take? Like if you're here now, right? Like you have already survived this remarkable thing. And how do we acknowledge that? So I'm so glad that you all are doing the work that you're doing or thinking about doing the work that you're doing. I feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to be in conversation with you. I know it's getting very late there. So thank you for your patience and your attention, your candor and your thoughtfulness. If there's any way at all we can continue to be in conversation, please don't hesitate. I'm just going to give you my work email. But feel free to get in touch. I would love to know how your projects develop.
Thank you so much. First to Rebecca for being so generous with your time, even though you wanted to leave so much earlier, and for everyone else to sort of engage in the exercise in spite of both time constraints, but also because I'm a little cognizant of the fact that these are a little too difficult experiences, simply because we just saw what we saw in April and May and how things were so difficult for us here in the second wave. So, yeah, I could imagine if somebody felt like, no, I don't want to read one more experience and be overwhelmed by it. But you all are more courageous. So thank you so much for engaging, because I think only these activities will make sense right now. So without taking further, taking more of your time, I know everybody must be hungry for all I know. Just one heads up would be that what we want to do next, and Avantika is here, we sort of planned this again, to continue this rhythm. So you read what it means to collect stories, and we want you to shift the table or turn the table around and collect a story or two before we meet on Wednesday. So when Ben and Avantika sort of open up the room and sort of exercise with you, you would have stories which you would have. So something Rebecca suggested, nudge a few family members or friends. If you know somebody who could use opening up, reach out to them. Right now, it's not going into the main archive, so there's no concern there. It is going into Drive, which we are using only for the workshop. But if you can convince them, either do an oral history recording, an interview recording, or if they prefer a different medium in terms of writing or sending something to you, then you just become the facilitator to collect it and put it into the archive. Again, they have the option of being anonymous, so we don't need to know who they are, but we just need to add to the archive so we can use these experiences to dialogue on Wednesday. So that's about it. And once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, so much. And we'll keep you posted as to how this workshop goes. But I'm sure everybody will individually reach out to you as well. With that, have a nice evening and a wonderful week ahead. See you all on Wednesday evening.